I'm Lauren Whitaker. I'm 35. I'm the founder and CEO of Orion Analytics, a data science company currently valued at $920 million. And last Saturday night, I found myself seated alone on the back terrace of a high-end New York steakhouse at my own father's 65th birthday dinner. Everyone else, my parents, my brother, and a dozen of their closest friends were inside, laughing, toasting, celebrating. Me, I was outside with the wind, a potted fern, and a $300 chair. No one had to say it. The message was loud and clear. I was still the outsider. But as I picked at my overpriced sea base and sipped a wine I didn't order, something shifted. Because while my family had written me off as the artsy, unstable one, they didn't know that I'd just greenlit the final phase of the biggest deal in Orion's history. And in less than an hour, a black helicopter bearing my company's logo would descend 5 blocks away, ready to take me to a private negotiation room atop our Manhattan office. And I wouldn't be walking out quietly. To understand that moment, you have to know where I came from. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a house where the worth of a person was measured in SAT scores, Ivy League acceptances, and the weight of their last name in social circles. My dad, Walter Whitaker, is a retired hedge fund manager. A legend in certain circles. Sharp, rigid, proud. And he'd mapped out a life plan for both his kids before we could walk. My older brother Grant fit into that mold seamlessly. Boarding school, Yale, Goldman Sachs. He walked the Whitaker path like it was genetic. Me, I was reading sci-fi novels and reverse engineering software for fun by the time I was 10. My favorite memories were in solitude, building something, breaking it down, building it better. But Dad didn't consider code a real career. Data science is for number crunchers, not leaders, he once said. I still remember the night I got into Stanford's data science program. I ran into the kitchen practically vibrating. Mom smiled and congratulated me gently. But Dad, he just said Grant got into Harvard Law. That's where the real leaders go. That was the night I stopped trying to impress him. At least that's what I told myself. At Stanford, I found my people. I found my vision. I found the beginnings of Orion Analytics, an idea I developed with 2 friends in a cramped apartment over endless ramen and coffee-fueled nights. We created a platform that translated complex datasets into actionable insights for medium-sized logistics firms. It was niche. It was smart. It worked. By 28, I'd secured my first round of seed funding. By 30, we hit $10 million in revenue. By 33, we were in talks with the Department of Transportation and several Fortune 100 companies. But none of that earned me a seat at the Whitaker table, not really. At family events, I was always Lauren, the one who does computer stuff. Dad would ask about Orion like it was a quirky little Etsy shop. Still playing with data, huh, he'd joke. And I'd smile like it didn't burn. So when the formal invitation to Dad's 65th birthday arrived, thick cardstock cursive gold lettering, black tie optional, I knew it wasn't about me. It never was. But something inside me whispered, "You've built something real. Maybe this time they'll see it." I picked out a navy blue structured gown. I even chose a first edition copy of The Intelligent Investor as a gift. Subtle, respectful, impressive. But more importantly, I scheduled a boardroom session for later that night. Because after 2 years of negotiation, Orion was set to acquire Centric Quantum, a fast-growing AI modeling firm valued at $700 million. Our final meeting, 10:30 p.m. Manhattan. It would change the face of my company and put us at the front of the next wave in transportation analytics. What my father called a cute little experiment was about to reshape an entire industry. And that's why when the host at the restaurant led me not into the private room with my family, but instead toward a side exit marked terrace seating, I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I smiled, sat down, ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, and waited. Because sometimes being underestimated is the best setup for the most powerful entrance. I wasn't always this composed. If this had happened 5 years ago, if I had been seated outside while my family celebrated my father's birthday without me, I might have held back tears the entire dinner, left early, and spent the night wondering what I'd done wrong. But 5 years of building Orion from the ground up had forged something different in me. I'd learned how to read a room, negotiate under pressure, and keep my posture steady even when everything inside me screamed. That kind of conditioning doesn't come from privilege. It comes from survival. Still, as I sat there watching silhouettes of my family through the frosted glass, laughter bubbling over candlelight, I couldn't deny the sting. My mom, elegant as ever in pearl earrings and her signature silk scarf, raised a toast. Her gaze swept the room, then, for a fleeting second, paused on the patio door. She saw me. Her expression softened, and she gave the tiniest nod, the kind that tried to say, "I'm sorry," without actually saying the words. But she didn't move. She didn't come outside. She didn't invite me in. And that told me everything. My brother Grant stepped out a few minutes later, nursing a scotch and wearing that signature smugness I'd grown up with. He leaned against the patio railing like it was a throne. "Lauren," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes, "didn't think you'd actually show." "Happy birthday to Dad," I replied calmly, sipping my wine. Grant's eyes flicked to my glass. "Nice choice. You know that bottle costs more than a month of rent in most cities." "Then good thing Dad's paying," I said lightly. He laughed, but there was venom under the surface. "We had to seat you out here. Guest list got a little tight. Lot of important people inside Dad's partner's board members. You understand?" "Sure," I said. "I understand perfectly." He took another sip, and then, as if he'd been waiting to deliver the blow, "Besides, the patio's good for independent types. You know, people who don't quite fit the mold." There it was, not even subtle. "You mean people who don't do things the Whitaker way?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Let's face it, Laure. You've always been different. Playing with data, chasing government contracts. You've got your little world out there, and we've got ours in here. No hard feelings." I set my glass down. "No hard feelings," I echoed. He went back inside, leaving behind the echo of that condescension. I could have left right then. Walked back to my hotel, buried myself in spreadsheets, and pretended this never happened. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone and checked the latest from my team. 3 missed calls from Camilla, our general counsel. 2 texts from Deshawn, our COO. "Centric board needs our final number by 10:00. They're leaning toward Synex Tech. We need to counter." I responded simply, "I'll be there in 45. Tell them I want 30 minutes with their CEO before the vote." Then I messaged my pilot. "Pick up Central Park, 5 blocks south of 47th, 9:30 sharp." His reply was immediate. "ETA 25 min on standby." The waiter returned to check on me. He looked barely 22 and genuinely mortified. "Would you like dessert, Ms. Whitaker?" he asked carefully. I smiled. "Do you have anything with fireworks?" He chuckled nervously. "I'm afraid not." "That's all right," I said, standing up and gathering my clutch. I brought my own fireworks. I gave the patio one last glance. Inside, the toasts were still going. Dad was probably halfway through recounting some old war story about building his fund from the ground up, while ignoring that his daughter had done something eerily similar in a newer, faster world. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. In a strange way, I felt grateful. Because that chair in the corner of the patio reminded me exactly where I stood in this family. And now I was finally done asking for a seat at their table. I was about to build my own. I stepped out onto the sidewalk just as the first low thump of helicopter blades pulsed through the air above Manhattan. Heads turned. People on the street slowed down. Phones were raised. The sound of the approaching rotor cut through the city's hum like a drum roll before a reveal. As I turned the corner into Central Park, a gust of wind tugged at my coat. I walked quickly but purposefully, my heels clicking against the pavement. I wasn't just heading to a meeting, I was leaving behind a version of myself that used to beg to be seen. Up ahead, through a clearing in the trees, the sleek black Orion helicopter began to descend. The company logo gleamed under the spotlight from its underbelly, a stylized O orbiting a data grid. It wasn't just a logo anymore. Tonight, it was a flag. As I approached, two members of our security detail had already roped off a small section of the lawn and were directing curious bystanders away from the landing site. Ms. Whitaker, one of them said, offering a hand as the helicopter touched down. Your team is en route. Mr. Mason and Ms. Patel will meet you in the boardroom. I nodded, ducked into the cabin, and buckled in beside Camilla, our legal lead. She was already flipping through documents on her tablet, eyes sharp behind her glasses. We need to finalize our valuation position, she shouted over the blades. Synex Tech offered $740 million flat. All cash. We're matching, but they're including a 2-year earnout and executive retention packages. They're buying for the PR optics, I said. We're offering strategic alignment. Big difference. Camilla nodded. We emphasize the tech integration in our pitch. You've got 5 minutes with Centric's CEO before the vote. He'll be at the rooftop lounge. I leaned back into my seat. This was the part that made my heart race, not the family drama, not even the flight, but the negotiation, the dance of risk and reward. It was everything I had fought for, and I wasn't going to let a man named Grant, or a father who thought startups were hobbies, diminish it. As the helicopter banked over the city, I glanced out the window. Far below, just beyond the shimmering lights, I spotted the rooftop of the restaurant, La Rive, the same one where my father's party continued without me. Tiny figures clustered around champagne and chatter. I wondered if they were watching the sky. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from my mother. I declined. Immediately afterward, Grant's name popped up. I let that one ring out too. Then came the final call, my father. I paused. For a second, I considered ignoring it. But something told me to answer. I put it on speaker. Lauren, Dad's voice barked through the line, sharp with irritation. What the hell is going on? People are saying there's a helicopter with your company's name on it, landing in the middle of Central Park. That's correct, I said simply. What are you doing? He snapped. Are you trying to embarrass the family? I'm heading to a business meeting, I replied evenly. A significant one. You couldn't wait until tomorrow. No. The Centric Quantum acquisition is in final negotiations. Their board votes in an hour. I'm the final conversation. There was silence. Centric Quantum, he repeated. They're worth nearly $1 billion. $740 million, I corrected, pending negotiation. More silence. Then, you're leading this. I'm the CEO, Dad. That's what I do. He exhaled, but the indignation was gone, replaced by something softer. Disbelief. Maybe awe. I didn't know it was that serious, he said finally. You never said anything. You never asked. I let that sit in the air for a moment before ending the call. No goodbye, no apology, no I'm proud of you. But for the first time, I didn't need it. The helicopter began to descend toward Orion Tower, our headquarters in Midtown, and my real team was already preparing for the next move. This wasn't about drama anymore. This was business. And I was right where I belonged. We landed on the rooftop helipad of Orion Tower at precisely 9:47 p.m. The moment the skids touched down, I felt the thrum of purpose return, the energy I always got when I stepped into a room where everything mattered. Where what I said could shift millions of dollars. Where my presence wasn't questioned, it was expected. Camilla and I stepped into the elevator, descending straight to the executive floor. As the doors opened, a wave of intensity hit me like a wall. The boardroom had been transformed into a war room. Multiple screens displayed side-by-side comparisons of our offer versus Synex Tech's projections, integration flowcharts, and retention analysis. A dozen team members were in motion, legal, finance, strategy. My COO, Deshawn, was already talking with our modeling expert in a corner, while Gregory, our CFO, looked up from his laptop and mouthed, "They're here." I walked in heels, silent on the hardwood floor, and the room straightened without a word. "Give me the top line," I said. Gregory jumped in. "Centric's board is leaning toward Synex Tech. They're offering $740 million all cash, but it's a strip and merge. You know how Synex operates. They'll dissolve Centric's culture within 6 months. Which is exactly why this team still has a shot," Camilla added. "Centric's CEO Marcus Levin built that company from scratch. He doesn't want to watch it get gutted. They're in the lounge upstairs, Deshawn said, waiting on you. I nodded, took a breath, and headed for the private elevator to the rooftop suite. There was no room for emotion now. No patio chairs, no withheld recognition. Just the challenge in front of me and the fact that I was ready for it. Marcus Levin was standing by the window when I arrived, looking out at the city lights, like he was searching for an answer in them. He turned when I entered, and for a moment we simply looked at each other. Two founders. Two people who'd gone from nothing to this moment, from ramen-fueled hustle to billion-dollar decisions. Lauren, he said, extending a hand. I appreciate you coming. Wouldn't miss it, I said, shaking it firmly. I understand you're being courted aggressively. He smirked. That's one way to put it. I sat across from him. Look, I'll be direct. Synex can outbid us by a margin. They've got deeper cash. But here's what they don't have: our long-term vision. If you go with them, you'll be integrated into their stack. Your brand will vanish. Your people will be reassigned, and within a year, Centric will be a logo in their annual report, not a company. And with Orion, he asked, you become the backbone of our next-gen predictive analytics engine. Your team stays intact. You lead a division, not just survive in one. You keep your culture. And more importantly, you finish what you started. He nodded slowly. I've read your proposal. The equity split is generous. The earnout is smart. You've protected my executive team that matters more than I expected. Because you built something real, I said. So did I. I don't want to cannibalize you, Marcus. I want to partner. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and extended his hand again. Let's do this. Back in the boardroom, the announcement dropped like a spark in dry kindling. The team sprang into final action: term sheets, document signing, press embargoes. I stood back and watched the engine we'd built go into motion. Not a startup. Not a side project. A machine. And I had been the one to build it. My phone buzzed again, a text from my father. Just 5 words. We should talk. Impressed tonight. I stared at the screen. No emojis, no exclamation points. And yet, for Walter Whitaker, that was practically a love letter. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned my focus back to the room, to the company, the people. The mission that had believed in me long before anyone at that steakhouse ever would. This was the real family. By 1 year in AM, the deal was official. We had secured Centric Quantum, not with the biggest check, but with the boldest vision. As the final signatures were rendered on the digital contract, a quiet kind of electricity filled the room. The kind that doesn't explode into wild celebration, but settles into the bones like pride. I watched Marcus shake hands with Deshawn, Gregory, and Camilla. His face looked a little stunned, not with fear, but with realization. He wasn't just selling his company. He was joining something larger, and he knew it. As the room began to break off into side conversations, finalizing logistics, drafting internal announcements, preparing embargoed press, I stepped out onto the balcony to breathe. New York, from 30 stories up at night, is its own kind of ocean. Lights ripple endlessly in every direction. I leaned on the railing and let the adrenaline drain from my body. Only then did I feel the ache in my feet, my shoulders, my heart. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mom. Please call when you can. Your father doesn't know what to say. I read it 3 times. I didn't know what to say either. You see, the last time my father said he was proud of me, I was 13. I'd won a statewide math competition, beat out a bunch of private school kids with last names that sounded like law firms. At the dinner table that night, he'd clapped me on the back and said, "Maybe you'll be useful after all." I remember pretending to smile. I remember going to my room later and writing it down in my journal like it was scripture. Useful. I walked back into the boardroom where the final documents were being saved to our secure servers. Camilla caught my eye and gave me a nod. We're live. And just like that, Orion Analytics had doubled in scale in one night. Our acquisition of Centric Quantum would make headlines by sunrise, and not just in TechCrunch or Fast Company. This was the kind of deal that hit the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Forbes. A woman-led company in tech, in data, in predictive AI had outmaneuvered a Fortune 100 giant. But that wasn't the story I was focused on. As the team began packing up and filtering out, I made one more call, not to my family, but to Stephanie. Steph had been my first investor, my best friend. The only one who'd seen the vision before there was anything to see. She picked up on the first ring. "You closed it, didn't you?" she said. "It's done." I could hear the grin in her voice. "Told you, you're a damn machine." I sat alone on the patio tonight, I admitted. At my father's birthday. "Of course you did," she said. "He doesn't know how to sit with a woman more powerful than him. You scare him, Laura." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softer now. "I'm... something. It's hard to explain. Proud. Exhausted. Free, maybe." There was silence on the line for a moment. "Then you did something no one can ignore. Not them. Not the industry. Not yourself." And she was right. The most significant part of the night wasn't the deal. It was the shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't hoping they'd see me. I didn't care. After I hung up, I sat alone in the now quiet conference room. I stared at the digital signature on the final document glowing on the big screen at the front of the room. Under Authorized Signatory, Lauren Whitaker, Chief Executive Officer. I touched the screen lightly just once, not out of sentimentality, out of confirmation. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own story. I felt like the author. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Orion acquires Centric Quantum in $740 million deal. Outpaces tech giant in midnight power move. Lauren Whitaker makes history with one of the year's most strategic AI acquisitions. Helicopter CEO how a late-night exit from family dinner led to a billion-dollar merger. I couldn't stop laughing when I saw that last one. It was dramatic, sure, but also oddly accurate. The media loved the story. They ran with the imagery: the woman in a floor-length gown stepping into a black helicopter under the Manhattan skyline. The juxtaposition of a family ignoring her while a corporate world waited on her word. But what they didn't see, what no camera captured, was what that moment actually meant to me. Because yes, it was cinematic. But more importantly, it was closure. I spent the rest of the morning doing back-to-back interviews. CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg Tech. All asking the same thing: how did Orion outmaneuver Synex Tech? I gave the polished answers. Integration plans. Team. Retention, vision, alignment. But inside, I knew the truth. We won because we weren't chasing a headline, we were building something worth believing in. And I finally believed in myself more than I needed my father to. Around noon, after the final press call, I headed back to my apartment. I hadn't slept. I hadn't even changed. My dress still smelled like boardroom espresso and rooftop wind. As I stepped inside, I finally let myself collapse on the couch. My phone buzzed. Again. It was Dad. The message was short, formal. "Your deal is significant. We should talk. I may have misjudged the scope of your work." It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was something. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit unread while I ordered breakfast at 1:00 p.m. and took the longest shower of my life. Later that afternoon, a call came through. This time, it was Mom. I answered. "Darling," she began already in her careful diplomatic tone, "your father is processing." "Is that what we're calling it?" I said, wrapped in a bathrobe, sipping coffee. She sighed. "He's proud. He just doesn't know how to say it. He was blindsided by the scale of everything. So were his colleagues. They've been calling him all morning, asking about you." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Now that the fund managers at Berkshire are reading about me, I'm suddenly interesting." "Lauren." "No, Mom. It's okay. I get it. I've always known where I stood. I just didn't realize how little space I actually took up until last night." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "I owe you an apology too." That made me sit up. "I should have said something. About the seating. About how they treat you. I've taken the easy way out too many times. I didn't know what to say. It was the first real ownership I'd heard from her in my adult life." "I don't want to lose you," she said. "You never had me," I said quietly. Not really, but maybe that can change. We agreed to meet for lunch, just the two of us, later in the week. I didn't know what that would lead to. Maybe nothing. Maybe something slow and careful. But it was no longer about getting them to love me the way I wanted. It was about building a relationship on my terms if I chose to. And for the first time, I had a choice. I wasn't the daughter waiting to be invited in anymore. I was the woman who built her own building and hung her name above the door. That Friday, I met my mom at a quiet cafe near Orion's headquarters, a little French bistro with outdoor seating and cloth napkins. She was already there when I arrived, wearing slacks and a cardigan instead of her usual pearls and polished heels. That in itself felt like a statement. "Lauren," she said, standing awkwardly and giving me a light hug. "You look powerful." I smiled politely and sat down. "Thanks. I feel tired." She gave a small laugh, the kind that tried to smooth the air. "I imagine so. Your face has been all over my news feed. Even your high school math teacher commented on one of the articles. He said, 'That girl always had a spark.'" "That's generous," I said, folding my napkin. A waiter brought us coffee. She fidgeted with the handle for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about never feeling like you had space in the family." I looked at her, silent. "You're right," she continued. "You didn't. Not the kind you needed. And I let that happen. I let your father dictate who we were proud of, who got the spotlight." It was strange hearing her say it so plainly. I kept expecting the conversation to veer into excuses, but she stayed steady. "You were so independent," she added. "I told myself you didn't need the same kind of attention. You were strong. You didn't ask for anything." "I didn't ask," I replied, "because I learned early on that asking wouldn't change anything." She flinched. "I know." We sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "When I saw that helicopter land, it wasn't just shocking, it was humbling. I realized I barely knew what you did not really. I've never visited your office. I've never asked about your team, your vision." "And why is that?" I asked gently, not accusing, just curious. She sighed. "Because I didn't understand it. Your world intimidated me. I didn't want to feel foolish. So I played it safe, asked surface questions, pretended to be supportive but never really engaged." I stared at her for a long time. "I'd like to change that," she added. "If you'll let me." It wasn't a breakthrough moment with violins in the background, but it was real. We talked for over an hour about the acquisition, my early struggles, the loneliness of building something big in silence. She asked questions, this time real ones, about leadership, burnout, legacy, and she listened fully. By the time the check came, something had softened between us, not repaired, not fixed, but acknowledged. As we stood to leave, she reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. "It's not much," she said, "but it's something." Inside was a printed photo, me at 15, hunched over an old desktop computer in the basement, lit by a single desk lamp. I was smiling, focused. "Your father took that," she said. "You were building a website for your science fair project. I remember him saying, 'What is she even doing down there?' I said, 'Something that might matter someday.' I wish I'd said it louder." My throat tightened. I nodded. Later that day, back at Orion, I stood in my office holding the photo. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, the city pulsed with movement, with meaning. My team was buzzing, prepping for our post-merger integration plan. Meetings were stacked, analysts were watching us. But for that moment, I just stood there, remembering the girl in that photo. The girl no one clapped for. The girl who built her own applause. The following week, I received an unexpected visit. It was Wednesday morning, and I was halfway through reviewing our Q3 growth models when Janine, my assistant, buzzed in. "Your father is here," she said cautiously. "He doesn't have an appointment." I stared at the intercom for a full 5 seconds before answering. "Send him in." My heart ticked up a notch, not from nerves, but from uncertainty. I hadn't seen him since the birthday dinner. Our last exchange had been a handful of words over the phone, followed by that half-hearted text. No apology. Just, confusion, wrapped in pride. The door opened and in walked Walter Whitaker, the man whose approval I'd chased for most of my life. He was dressed in his standard navy suit and tie, but he looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. His eyes scanned the office, the view, the glass walls, the Orion crest mounted behind my desk. "This is quite the setup," he said, voice rough. I stood. "Thanks. It works." He walked around slowly, hands clasped behind his back, like he was inspecting a museum. "I've been reading," he said, "about the Centric deal, the implications. It's impressive." I waited. No response. Just silence. He turned to face me. "I didn't understand what you were doing. For years. I thought you'd gone off course. Built something risky. I told myself you were chasing novelty, not structure." "You made that clear," I said evenly. He nodded. "I did." There was another pause, and then he exhaled, not dramatically, but deeply, like he was letting something go. I was wrong. The words hung there heavy and unfamiliar. "I see that now," he continued. "You've built something with scale, vision, impact. You've done what I didn't think was possible in your field, and I underestimated you." My fingers rested on the edge of my desk. I kept my body still, but inside everything was shifting. "I'm not asking for anything," he added. "Not forgiveness. Just the chance to understand it now. If you're willing to let me." I studied him, the man who had once toasted my brother for making partner at his firm while referring to me as the daughter with the gadgets. Now standing in my office surrounded by proof that I had never needed his permission to become powerful. "Would you like a tour?" I asked. His shoulders relaxed. "Yes, very much." I walked him through each department: data science, product strategy, client partnerships. Every team stood a little taller when I introduced him. My father, the Walter Whitaker. "This is where the Centric integration is happening," I explained. "Their engineering team is moving onto this floor next month. We're combining platforms without disrupting UX." He nodded slowly, genuinely curious. "Smart. And your retention play. That's why their CEO went with you, isn't it?" "One of many reasons," I said. Back in my office, he gestured toward the photo of me at 15, the one my mom had given me. "I remember taking that," he said quietly. "You were so focused. I had no idea what you were doing." "I did," I replied. He turned to me, something resembling emotion in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Lauren. Not because the press is, not because your stock is up, but because you were right. About all of it." I didn't cry. I didn't break. But something in me exhaled. For the first time in my life, I believed him. Not because I needed it, but because I no longer needed it. He stood to leave. "Thank you for showing me around." "Thank you for coming," I said. "Really?" As he stepped out, I returned to my desk, the seat I'd built for myself. Not the one I had waited to be invited to. And as the door closed behind him, I whispered to no one in particular. "I'm proud of me too." The months following the Centric acquisition moved fast. Our integration strategy worked even better than we'd planned. Engineering teams adapted. Clients stayed loyal. Our tech stack doubled in power, and our name, IT, started to carry weight, real weight, across industries that had never noticed us before. Orion was no longer the scrappy analytics firm people underestimated. We were a force. But with that growth came a different kind of challenge: personal boundaries. For years I had begged my family for acknowledgement. Now they were calling weekly, sending articles, forwarding emails from colleagues who'd seen me on Bloomberg. Suddenly, I was the brilliant daughter, the visionary, the Whitaker that took a different path. It was jarring. Especially when Grant texted out of nowhere, "I was hard on you. Probably jealous if I'm being honest. Congrats on everything." Short, blunt, surprisingly honest. I stared at it for 10 minutes before replying with 2 words. "Thank you." And that was it. No reconciliation, no long overdue heart-to-heart. Just space, and that was enough. I started being intentional about what I said yes to. I didn't return every call. I didn't attend every Sunday dinner invite. But I did have the occasional lunch with Mom, now more curious than performative. She asked thoughtful questions. She visited the office once more. She even attended a product launch we hosted downtown dressed in her country club best, but glowing with quiet pride. As for Dad, he stayed reserved but present. He emailed sometimes, sent a book recommendation once about behavioral economics and machine learning. It was his way of saying I'm paying attention. In the middle of all this, I also leaned deeper into the relationships that had carried me, not the ones based on blood, but on belief. Stephanie, Deshawn, Camilla, Gregory. My core team had been there through every messy startup night, every layoff risk, every near-deal collapse. So I did something I'd been dreaming about for years. I invited them and a dozen of our longest-standing employees to my apartment for a private celebration. No press, no speeches, just us. Wine music stories from the early days. At one point, Stephanie raised her glass and said, "To the real family, the one you choose." Everyone laughed, nodded, clinked glasses. And me. I looked around that room full of people who had seen me at my most uncertain, most exhausted, most alive, and I realized this was the table I'd always deserved to sit at. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone at the window of my apartment watching the city lights blink like signals in the dark. The same city I'd once felt invisible in, now pulsing beneath me like it belonged to me, like I belonged to it. I didn't need a helicopter or headlines anymore to feel seen, because I had built something that couldn't be ignored. Not by my family, not by the world, and most importantly, not by myself. It was just past 8 a.m. when Janine buzzed again. "Your father is here. No appointment again." I blinked. 2 visits in a month. He says it's important. I hesitated. The last visit had ended well, all things considered, but I wasn't ready for this to become routine, not yet. I still needed space to figure out what kind of relationship I actually wanted with him. Still, I nodded. "Send him in." Dad stepped in wearing a charcoal blazer instead of a full suit. No tie. It almost made him look approachable. He scanned the office like before, but this time with more familiarity than awe. "Lauren," he greeted, his tone flat but not cold. "I won't take much of your time." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit. What's going on?" He sat down stiffly, cleared his throat, and said, "I've been asked to speak at an industry leadership summit in October. It's a private gathering, founders, VCs, former fund managers, some of the newer fintech people." I waited, trying to read where this was going. "And they asked if you'd co-present," he added. "A joint keynote on legacy and innovation." I blinked. "You want me to speak with you?" He shifted in his seat. "They actually requested you. One of the organizers worked with Centric's board and saw what you pulled off. They want a case study on post-acquisition integration." I tilted my head, amused. "And they just happen to want a father-daughter duo." He winced. I said it might be interesting, the contrast in approaches. Old school, new school. A pause stretched. "I haven't agreed yet," I said. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because..." He hesitated. "Because I wanted to know if you'd even consider it." That admission alone was monumental. The Walter Whitaker I'd grown up with didn't ask. He announced. He expected. But now he was inviting. I leaned back in my chair. "You know, there was a time when I would have killed for this. To be seen next to you instead of beneath you." His eyes dropped for a second, and to his credit, he didn't deflect. "I know," he said quietly, "and I regret that." We sat in silence for a moment. The buzz of the office filtered in from outside keyboards, clicking voices, collaborating. My world still moving whether he showed up or not. "I'll think about it," I said at last. "If I agree, it won't be to validate you. It'll be to tell my side of the story. Without filter." He nodded. "That's fair." He stood to leave. Then as he reached the door, he turned. "You know, I used to think strength was about control, certainty. But watching you, I'm starting to believe it's about clarity. About knowing who you are no matter who's watching." I raised an eyebrow. That sounded suspiciously like growth. He almost smiled. "Let's not get carried away." After he left, I stared at the door for a long minute. Not because I was shaken, but because I wasn't. And that was the true shift. He no longer had the power to undo me, not with judgment, not with praise. Whether we shared a stage or not, I was already standing in my own light, and it was brighter than I ever imagined. The Leadership Summit took place 3 weeks later inside a sleek conference center overlooking the Hudson River. It was one of those ultra-exclusive events where everyone wore crisp neutrals, name tags were printed in gold, and every panel ended with a champagne toast. I almost said no, multiple times, but in the end I said yes, not for my father and certainly not for the crowd. I did it because I had something to say, and because for the first time I could stand beside him and not flinch. The room was packed with investors, founders, and executives, many of whom had probably dismissed me as the daughter of Walter Whitaker before the Centric deal made headlines. Our panel was titled Tradition Meets Disruption: 2 Generations of Leadership in Transition. Cute. Dad spoke first. He was polished, composed, still every inch the fund manager he'd always been. He talked about the long view, controlled risk, the value of structure. People nodded. They always did. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the mic, took a breath, and let the room settle. My name is Lauren Whitaker, I began. I'm the founder and CEO of Orion Analytics. Last year, our company led one of the largest AI acquisitions in transportation tech. But for most of my life, I was known as Walter Whitaker's daughter. Not the builder, not the strategist, not the executive, just the daughter. A few people shifted in their chairs. I was seated outside at family dinners, literally. I was told my company was a phase, that data wasn't leadership, that startups were unstable, and while I was pitching investors, hiring teams, and managing P&Ls, I was still seen as the one who didn't follow the map. Now they were listening. But here's what I learned, I continued. Maps are useful if you want to end up where someone else already went. But if you want to build something new, something real, you have to be willing to get lost first. That line hit. People straightened, eyebrows raised. I didn't build Orion to prove anything to anyone, but I also won't pretend I wasn't fueled by doubt, theirs and my own. And the greatest shift in my leadership happened the day I stopped chasing permission and started giving myself credit. There was a pause, a good one. The kind where you could feel the air change. I glanced at my father, who was watching me, not interrupting, not frowning, just listening. After the panel, people lined up to talk, not to him, to me. Founders, analysts, young women with notebooks. A senior partner from a VC fund pulled me aside and said, "Your story needs to be louder." I thanked them, shook hands, took cards. But what mattered most came an hour later in the hallway when Dad found me near the coffee bar. "You are extraordinary up there," he said, quiet and deliberate. And I didn't just mean the metrics. I meant your clarity. I nodded, a little stunned. He continued, "You didn't need me beside you to shine. You never did." I smiled, "But I'm glad you finally noticed." He chuckled. "Me too." That moment didn't erase everything. It didn't rewrite the past, but it reframed the present. We weren't a father and daughter struggling to connect anymore. We were two leaders who had finally learned how to speak the same language, one of respect. And for me, that was enough. After the summit, life returned to its relentless pace: board meetings, partnership launches, quarterly reports. Orion was expanding fast, and for once, every room I walked into, I was recognized, not as someone's daughter, not as surprisingly capable, but as the woman at the helm of one of the fastest-growing analytics firms in the country. Still, something had shifted personally, and I could feel it in the small, quiet ways. My father didn't suddenly become sentimental. That was never going to happen. But now, once a month, he sent me emails. Short, punctuated. Sometimes it was a podcast recommendation. Other times, a one-line comment about a new hire at Synex Tech. Every now and then, he'd just write, "Saw your interview in the journal Smart Framing." And while he still didn't say "I'm proud of you" in plain English, I learned to read between the lines. My mother, meanwhile, had evolved into a regular presence in my life, but on my terms. We began having lunch every other Friday. At first, she'd default to safe topics: the weather, her book club, whether I was getting enough sleep. But gradually, she began to ask real questions. Not just about the business, but about leadership pressure and what it meant to carry other people's livelihoods on your shoulders. One afternoon, she surprised me by saying, "I think you've redefined what success means in our family." I looked up from my sandwich. Really? Yes. Before you, success was always about proximity to power, to institutions, titles. You taught me that creating something from nothing, that's power too. I didn't say anything right away. I just reached for her hand. She let me. And as for Grant, our contact stayed minimal, a few polite text exchanges every few months. I didn't need reconciliation, just distance with civility. I wasn't holding a grudge anymore. I'd simply outgrown the need for his approval. He remained the same in many ways, polished, connected, driven. But I noticed a new tone in his words, a slight hesitancy in his responses when we crossed paths at a family event. Maybe he knew he'd misjudged me. Maybe he just didn't know how to relate to someone who no longer needed anything from him. Either way, it didn't matter, because I had stopped looking sideways. Instead, I poured my energy into building out Orion's mentorship initiative, a program I'd envisioned since the early days. We called it LIFT, and its mission was simple: identify promising women in data science and analytics, and give them the mentorship I never had. Not just funding or resume tips, but the real stuff: how to hold your voice in a room full of suits, how to ask for equity, not just salary, how to know when you're building a career and when you're building a legacy. The program took off. We received over 1,200 applications in the first month. And the best part, every time I sat with one of these women, coaching them through pitch strategies or investor rebuttals, I saw fragments of my younger self. The girl coding in her basement. The woman walking away from a family dinner to chase a billion-dollar deal. The leader now lifting others to their own tables. One Friday afternoon, as I walked through Orion's campus to meet a cohort of LIFT mentees, I paused by the glass entrance doors. The reflection staring back at me was no longer someone trying to prove herself. She was steady, respected, whole. The following spring, Orion was invited to ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. It was the kind of moment that founders dream about, a signal not just of success, but of arrival. A public acknowledgement that the scrappy little startup had grown into a serious player. The night before the ceremony, I stood alone in our downtown office looking out at the skyline, the city that had once swallowed me whole, now gleaming like it was ours. Stephanie walked in holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You ready for this?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." She handed me a glass and raised hers. To the girl who once got kicked out of a family dinner and now owns the entire building next door. We laughed, and I felt a mix of joy and stillness I hadn't known before. Not adrenaline, not performance, just groundedness. We'd built something lasting. The next morning, the team gathered on the platform. My name flashed across the electronic ticker: Orion Analytics, opening bell ceremony, CEO Lauren Whitaker. As the countdown hit 0, I pressed the button and the bell rang out loud and clear. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. The moment was loud, but I was calm. Later, in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, a journalist asked, "What does today mean to you?" I paused, then said, "It means I don't have to ask to be seated at anyone's table ever again. I brought my own." That night, we held a rooftop reception for our team, investors, and early employees. The view stretched endlessly, the city blinking beneath us like it was cheering too. Near the end of the evening, my father arrived. He wasn't in a suit, just a sweater and slacks. And this time, he didn't look around like he was trying to assess the place. He walked straight to me. "I saw the bell ringing," he said. "You didn't come to the floor." He shook his head. "Didn't want to be in the way. This was your moment." I nodded. "Thanks for coming. I wouldn't have missed it." We stood side by side for a few minutes, looking out over the skyline. Then, without prompting, he said, "You know, if someone had told me 15 years ago that my daughter would lead a billion-dollar company, I'd have said, sure, in publishing or fashion maybe. Not this." I raised an eyebrow. "And I would have been wrong," he added, a little smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. I smirked. "You would have been very wrong." He chuckled. "You showed us all." "I didn't do it to show you. I know, he said. That's what makes it even more powerful. We clinked glasses, his whiskey to my champagne, and for the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was earned. Later that evening, when most guests had left, I stayed behind with Stephanie Deshawn and a few others. We sat barefoot on patio furniture, heels kicked off ties, loosened plates of late-night snacks between us. There were no speeches, no Instagram stories, just laughter, warmth, and a shared sense of we did this. As the moon settled above the skyline, I realized something I hadn't put into words before. I wasn't just successful. I was free. Free from needing permission. Free from family narratives. Free to lead, to live, to choose. And that was the real win. By summer, Orion was operating at a scale I once thought belonged only to legacy firms, the kind my father spent his life managing, the kind that once looked at startups like mine with a smirk. We had tripled our client base, expanded into Europe. Our AI engine was now used by public infrastructure projects in 5 major cities. I was being invited to speak at panels I used to sneak into the back of. But more than that, something had changed internally, not in the company, but in me. I no longer flinched when someone mentioned my last name in the room. I didn't shrink when introduced as the daughter of Walter Whitaker. I didn't feel the need to correct anyone or prove a point, because now that was just one part of who I was, not the definition. And that freedom, that quiet, grounded confidence, was more valuable than any equity round or media feature. I found myself turning down a lot more offers, not because they weren't lucrative, but because they didn't align with the life I wanted. I declined a board seat on a fintech giant because it would have pulled me away from Orion's vision. I said no to a documentary crew pitching a feature on women who shocked the industry. I didn't want to be someone else's plot twist. I wanted to build, not perform. Instead, I started spending more time mentoring founders behind the scenes, one-on-one calls, anonymous funding through my angel network, quiet support for women and non-traditional leaders building things the world wasn't ready to understand. And I got letters, dozens, from young professionals, especially women, who had seen the helicopter clip, read the news stories, and felt something click. Your story made me stop apologizing. I sat outside the table too once. You helped me believe I can start something even if no one claps yet. They didn't see me as a celebrity. They saw me as a mirror. And that meant everything. One Saturday morning, I was cleaning out my closet when I found the Valentino gown I wore the night of my father's birthday, the night they seated me outside. It was perfectly preserved in its garment bag, untouched since that night. I unzipped it, stared at the sharp seams and midnight blue fabric. And then I smiled. I didn't need to keep it as armor anymore. I folded it gently, donated it to a nonprofit that outfitted young women for job interviews. Let someone else walk into a room with quiet fire. That night, I journaled something I hadn't done in months. I wrote, I no longer need the table I was denied. I built one, and the seats around it are full of people who see me. The helicopter wasn't the statement, the walking away was. The choosing myself was. Then I closed the journal and went to sleep. Not with ambition buzzing in my ears, but with peace. Sometimes people ask if my family ever fully came around. The truth, they changed a little. But I didn't need them to change completely for me to move forward. They respected me now. They understood or tried to. But I had stopped needing them to get it, because I finally got it myself. It's been over a year since that night on the patio, since the helicopter, since I left behind the part of me that once measured my worth through someone else's eyes. A lot has happened since then. Orion completed a second acquisition, bringing on a brilliant cybersecurity startup to bolster our infrastructure. We opened a satellite office in Chicago. We launched a paid research fellowship to help underrepresented technologists break into data analytics. But when people ask me what the most important milestone was, it wasn't the IPO. It wasn't the centric deal. It wasn't even the day my father finally said I was wrong. It was the quiet moment right after everything unfolded, when I sat alone in my hotel room gown, crumpled at the hem, makeup smudged, and realized I didn't feel small anymore. I felt full. Sometimes I replay that night in my head like a movie, the patio, the hushed judgment, the steady humiliation. But now when I see that moment, I don't see weakness. I don't see exile. I see ignition. That moment didn't break me. It revealed me. A few months ago, I was asked to write a letter to my younger self for a magazine feature. I almost declined. But one night, after everyone else had left the office, I opened a blank document and typed, "Dear 15-year-old Lauren, you're not too much. You're not too intense. You're not building something that no one will ever understand. You're just ahead of the curve. One day they'll seat you outside because they think that's where you belong. Smile. Stay. Let them underestimate you. Then quietly walk away and change everything. Love." The CEO who chose herself. That letter was never published. I asked the magazine to pull it last minute, not because I was embarrassed, but because it wasn't for the world. It was for me, for the part of me that needed to know you did it. You became her, and she was worth the wait. Today, I still walk into rooms where people don't expect much from me, and I still surprise them. But I don't do it for shock value. I do it because it's who I've always been. Because when they try to seat me in the corner, I don't fight to move closer. I rise. I leave. And somewhere nearby, a helicopter is always waiting. Success, I've learned, isn't a single moment. It's not the headline, the helicopter, or even the signed contract. It's the accumulation of choices, the small, quiet decisions to keep going when no one claps to speak, when your voice shakes to stand up even when they keep trying to sit you back down. I spent years thinking that validation would come from the people who raised me, that if I just achieved enough, earned enough, proved enough, they'd see me. But the truth is, the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't building a company. It was building a sense of worth that wasn't tied to their recognition. Choosing myself again and again, even when it was lonely, even when it was hard. Especially then. And that's the story I want others to remember. Not the helicopter. Not the headlines, but the fact that no matter how many times I was seated outside, overlooked, underestimated, I didn't stop building. I didn't stop becoming. So if you're listening to this, maybe in your own version of a patio seat, wondering if you'll ever be seen, let me tell you this. You don't need their permission. You don't need their applause. You only need the courage to keep building your own table. Because once you stop asking for a seat, you'll realize you were always meant to design the room. And someday they'll look up and see you in the sky rising,